Tū ki runga tū, ki raro tū, ki whea tū, ka whakuputaina ki te whaiao ki te ao Maramati he Māoriora. Tuatahi mā mātou, te miha tuai ki a koutou, kua hau mai koutou ki roto o Māori land. Te whakarongo noiho nei ki ngā kōrere pāna ki ngā kaupapa, more native minds. Me te rere o ngā tai o mihi ki a koutou e mātakitaki mai ani o koutou kāinga, tēnā koutou nau mai koutou ki roto ki tēnei wāhi kōrero. Kia ora koutou katoa. Hoino, e te whānau mā, he kaupapa kei te haere, he mātanga, kua piki mai ki rungi tātā mira. Nā rere, i runga i te kaupapa, he arahi a te kaupapa. Mai te hihiri o mahara, ahuatu ki te whakaaro tainua, ki tana whakakākahutia ki te kupu, ko i tini ko te huanga mai o te henengaro taketake, ngā roro o te tangata whenua. So welcome to Native Minds. Welcome to a chance to discuss matters of importance in our world with an Indigenous filter. The format of our sessions is very simple. We ask each of our guests to identify themselves by answering 3 questions. Who is your nation? What is your name? And what do you believe to be your raison d'etre, your personal kaupapa, your mission? So I'd like to ask our sisters to introduce themselves by answering those 3 questions. Eni, meni, mani, tahi.
Tōrera. Ko waio, he mokopuna hau o ngā iwi nui tonu, te iwi roa o Mōkai Pātea. Engari he ringa ki te awa tupua, ki Wanganui. Tētahi wawai ki te tihi o Ruapehu, ki ngā kāhui maunga. Ki tētahi ringa, tētahi wawai ki te awa o Rangitūkei, tētahi ringa ki te awa o Otaki. So yeah, from across all of those areas mai te kāhui maunga, and te iwiroa ki Tangaroa, ko Waio, ko Meretini Bennett Huxtable tōku ingoa. And what is my mission? I'm not too sure if it's my mission, but what I know and feel is that our world in our Indigenous world is a superhero power for me, and so I'm out there trying to, awhi all of our others in those spaces to reignite their own superpower again and remember it. So, yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, ngā mihi mō tō aroha kia mai o ko Meretini. Ko waio, he uri tēnei o ngā wairere mai i te kā ui maunga, ko te Wanganui, kei ko rā te kōrero ko au te awa ko au. He peka hoki o ngā te tūwhari toa, ngā te kahununa ki wairo hoki. I nei rā, i noho au kei Ōtaki, te mo wai Māori he au mō aku whānau ki te noho ki konei, i Wanganui te hāpori Māori. I tupu ake au kei Tauranga Moana, and ka tai ka hunuku i roto i te ao tai ao, kore toku pukinga matua pia. I tupu ake au hei aro ki taua mahi, ko Francene Weneti Advocate. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be sitting here talking such a big kaupapa. And what is my calling that you ask? I think I'm like a conduit. I think it's through my journey of learning about te taiao and my mahi, I've transformed from being a marine scientist, the start of my life, and even growing to the extent of growing fish in the marine environment, to understanding more what that looks like in a bigger picture, and now of working at a place called MetService. If you've all heard of that place before, it's our national weather forecasting organisation. And why am I there? I say to myself, it might be just tupuna interventions. And MetService, we'll talk about my role there later, but I think, in terms of my role, I think I'm like a conduit at this stage.
Tēnā koe, Francene, Meretini Bennett Huxtable. When you fellows speak, just keep those up, just so we can make sure that the peeps at home can hear. Hoi no, te kaupapa te wāhi kōrero nei is advertised to talk about climate change. He kaupapa nui tērā. I roti te tau nei ko rongo hoki tātou te tangata ki ngā hiunga mai o ngā huarere, ngā waikua, puke nei ngā whenua ko ngā horo. He aue e tā teiwi. And we know this stuff is happening, and there are changes beyond our control. But in a way, this is the result of our own activity, our own behaviour as human beings. Since the time of the Industrial Revolution, the Electric Revolution, and now in the Digital Revolution, it's been a bit of a mantra in our species that untrammeled growth is going to be the rongoā, the medicine for everything. You know, if something's gone wrong, more growth, more growth. And in that headlong rush, we can see that our environment has suffered. So in part, that's what we're going to talk about today, and to learn a little of the observations of Meretini and Francene about what they see, observe and feel about our natural world and the implications for that in the right now. So, e hoa, Meretini, māu te wā, tēnā koe.
I think we're going to speak. So, I guess for me, I'm always going to premise it from a Indigenous lens. When we use the whakatauki ko te awa ko, we're not saying I am the river and the river is me, just blatantly as a sentence. I'm saying that my blood runs of the river, my thoughts run from the river, the memory that our river has ever traversed across the millennia also exists in our toto as Indigenous. So when I say it's physically me, I actually mean that. And so there's a huge responsibility in speaking into terms when you place yourself within the taiao. And so everything that we do, I guess, from an Indigenous lens is always going to be, for me, centred around what my role is in there and in that space. So recently we've been working on the last 3 years in a kaupapa called Taiōrongo. And so, ngā tohu o Taiōrongo. So it was set up just to help revive our own Indigenous practices again, our own kōrero tuku iho, which was about re-engaging back in with the taiao in a language that it remembers. And so what we've discovered over this whole entire time is that the reo doesn't just exist on our tongues, it also exists in our hands. And more so from an Indigenous world lens, it actually does exist in our hands. So the people that actually have been holding a lot of this whakaaro, this mātauranga, has been sitting in the hands of our mahinga kai, the observers of our environment. And so right now what we're finding in the study that we're doing is the re-engagement of those two worlds coming back together, where you have reo as a code breaker, I guess, the language, as code breaking, and those of us that have been in the mahinga kai space being able to both share. So Taiōrongo is about how do we engage with environment through celestial knowledge, through terrestrial, so ngā tuhi o te rangi, ngā tuhu o te nuku, so through our terrestrial knowledge, and through tiro, so through the observation of humans, how are we interacting and learning about that. And so that's been a huge part of the 3 years that we've been in this kaupapa, which is essentially what we're trying to do on a bigger scale, I guess, with the actual kaupapa, is help our iwi farm entity, agribusiness, to work better in line with our taiao, and to make more critical envirocentric decisions as opposed to our human-centric decision making. And so that's what we're hoping to drive through this kaupapa and reconnecting ourselves back to our taiao, to our whenua. And so, so that's for me, where I'm sitting in that space at the moment. I'll pass it over to Francene to add.
Okay.
Kina ki on to the end of that.
Kia ora Meretini. So at this time it's Matariki, and it's when we connect to the stars and we look at the stars, and for us here also is poanga, and it's like a resetting of the year. And when we look at those ngā whetū o te taiao I roto I te Matariki, there's stars in there that relate to the environment. Now it's a really important time at this time is that when they rise, we're taking a reading from them that's going to help set the year. And what do those stars look like? And our ancestors have devised a pattern from a long time ago, and they've been able to help predict the weather from reading those stars. That just gives us an indication, and that's ngā tuhi o te rangi. We take a first reading, and it will say, it looks like it may be a lot more moisture or a lot more winds. So that's ururangi and waipurangi. Now what we're also doing is the ngā tohu o te whenua. So with the reading of those matariki as we set for the new year, we, through our observations together, we're looking at the taiao and trying to figure out what is the taiao telling us, and how do we respond, and how do we behave, and it informs our decision making. So ultimately we're in this kaupapa here about climate change, but the climate's doing its thing. What are we doing in response to it? And I think that's the most important thing for all of us at this time, is that what's our contribution and how are we behaving to it. And this learning that we're doing with Tai Orongo is that we're reconnecting again through our Indigenous knowledge systems, our mātauranga Māori, our kōrero tuku iho. And from there, that reconnection to the environment is starting to talk to us, because we're starting to see again. It's always been there. So we've just been disconnected. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've been learning as part of this kaupapa Tai Orongo. And it's the reconnection to the environment, and then through that practice of mātauranga Māori, it's forcing us to have a relationship. And through practice, it's changing our behaviours, and it's informing our decisions. I think ultimately, with reading what the celestial signs are telling us, with Matariki, with poanga, what's all the different keys that the environment's been doing. We've had floods, we've had extreme weather, we've had cyclones, and they're happening more often. Why are they happening more often? And how are we going to adapt? And then how are we going to be resilient? And there's so much involved in that. But what I hope you all take away is, what's your contribution to it, and how are you going to make your decisions based on what's happening around us with the environment's in turmoil. I think there's an element that it's just going to happen, because that, from a scientific perspective, which I've been exposed to at MetService, is that they're weather observers as well. And when Cyclone Gabrielle was on its way, and we've got a suite of 80 meteorologists, roughly about 50 odd forecasters, and they work 24/7. We have shift workers, and when they could see Cyclone Gabrielle coming, it was about 2 weeks prior to hitting New Zealand. To be honest, it felt like I was working with 150 matikiti. It's like they could see it coming imminent, even though outside it was beautiful and sunny. Now, what I could see was how are we messaging around getting a reaction, and how do we respond to it. We're kind of playing it down, and a lot of us missed the severity of what the Cyclone Gabrielle was going to do when it hit. Just to take it up another level, if we look wide of Aotearoa, we're a country that gets pretty severe weather anyway. It's called natural climatic variation, and that's just what happens all the time. So like all the flooding in Napier, you see it in a consistent cycle, and I reckon our tupuna would have seen the same. Now with our observations, what's outside of that pattern? That's what we need to take note of, and that isn't natural climatic events. It's climate change. It's above that, and what's happening is it's happening more often. And so these cyclones, that's going to happen more often. So that's the connection, I think, with the work that we're doing with our revitalising our ancestral knowledge systems, so we can get back to reconnecting to the environment, taking the cues from the environment, what she's telling us, and then we need to think, okay, maybe I won't get a keep cup when I buy a coffee. Maybe I need to take my own cup. Like, what's your behaviour to reduce it? And in the future, we're getting a lot of flooding, and moisture is coming more so on our east coast, and on the west coast we're also going to see more flooding. So Kapiti area, we're going to see it's going to get wetter. For Gisborne, Napier, historically they already get quite severe weather anyway, but we're going to get more droughts and more flooding, more to the extreme. Why do those areas get that anyway, and why are Māori the most susceptible to it? Because pre-colonisation, when we had all the land confiscations, all the most productive land was taken from us, and what was left were the regions that weren't as productive, and that's those Tairāwhiti, Napier regions. Even though they're kind of good, but they get hit with severe weather when it happens. So that makes us, our whānau that are based up in those valleys that are already vulnerable, more vulnerable. So come summertime, they're going to get more heat and stress, and we don't have ventilation in our homes, so our people are going to suffer from that. Just like on the west coast, when we're going to have more flooding, we're going to have our lands, So how do we adapt to that, and what do we do around our behaviours? So I'll stop there.
No.
Pai e rā kōrero. Think about questions at the whanau we can discuss with Meretini and Francene. Francene, to what extent, not many of us know what the MetService does. I'm blown away that on the phone I can press a button and I can see rain clouds and stuff like that. It's just personal interest, but what does the MetService do? How powerful can they be? And therefore, when you work with these other observers, what is the Indigenous observation bringing?
Good question. And MetService has been around for 162 years. It's New Zealand's oldest research institute. I am the first Pou Arahi in that time in the executive leadership team. So this isn't because they're trying to jump on the Māori trend. They're actually genuinely in our strategic objective, and hence why I've come in. MetService wants to uphold the tiriti, and we've got a strategic objective in there around changing the way we build trust and relevance with Māori. Now, what they are seeing is what I raised about before, is more extreme weather is coming. MetService is highly cognizant that we've got more Māori populations in those vulnerable coastal regions, and they're actually really genuinely concerned about us. So I'm there to build a strategy, Rautaki Māori, and also, like I said before, maybe I'm the conduit, and I'm there due to tupuna interventions. With this learning that I've been exposed to with our Taiorongo kaupapa, perhaps I'm there to be the conduit to help an agency who's got national coverage, who warns, who's responsible for warning the whole of Aotearoa when extreme weather's coming. So they're quite genuinely concerned about people's safety, and that's why MetService exists.
Is there a political power behind MetService? I mean, a lot of development in the country has been in the wrong places. Wetlands and all these things are vulnerable to weather as well. Therefore, is the MetService opinion, does it have clout in perhaps having an impact, a better reversing inappropriate development, for example?
I think the beauty, or which I've learned, I've been at MetService for a year, I think the beauty in MetService is its people. You've got these people who are weather observers, and they watch all the time, 24/7. They can see the changes, even though it comes through as data. Comes through as data and the number crunches. In terms of clout, definitely has a role. But at the moment, it has a role because we are, I think in a global sense, where MetService is a member of the World Meteorological Services or organisation. So it means that there's international standards on weather forecasting. So it's a safety issue. So you can't just have many other weather providers saying it's going to be raining, it's going to be flooding. We've got international standards that we're required to meet, and that gives the credibility of our forecasting. So clout, maybe it sits at the global, in my view, because I look at it that way because Māori are global. Yeah, we're global. We're getting things right here, but we're always interested in what other Indigenous cultures are doing, what we can share, because Mātauranga Māori is about sharing. Maybe there's something for global clout around what are we doing to change our behaviours, and that's the messaging and the impact. And severe weather's coming, we need to change our messaging rather than this is what it's doing, saying this is what we need to, what the impact's going to be.
Well, in terms of global clout, when you've got a ruling in law with regard to dawa and its personality, if you like, in law, and you talk about that personality not being very, very deep and utterly fused and connected, how can that whakaaro have a greater impact on the world, I guess? Because there's legal precedent in there as much as there is Indigenous acuity. Well, Superhero is going to unpick that. Any questions would people like to raise? So,
I'd just like to get a bit of insight as to what your thoughts on changing behaviours mean as far as people in response to what you believe is climate change.
I don't know.
How we change our behaviours. How are we going to change our behaviours?
Yeah. What perhaps has Taiorongo sort of shown you with regard to observations that are the clue to the type of behaviours that we need to change?
Yeah, so I'm a huge advocate for our knowledge system, and that's a huge part of what's not happening. So with Francene down at MetService, our team has gone along to MetService to have a look. So Francene has a group chat that we sit in as Taiorongo, and then Francene has her MetService group chat, and both chat groups are sharing exactly the same type of kaupapa fortunate for us, I guess, from an Indigenous lens, is that we have karakia and kōrero that also unpacks a lot of it. So what we've noticed, I guess, with MetService is that tāwhirirangi, everything that's happening atmospherically, is hugely a part of, because that's the prediction stuff as well, the higher level prediction. Combining that with our own knowing of the land gives us a tāwhiri mātea scope of it as well. So we've been able to, I guess, create change there in that space and have those discussions. I guess the one thing with Tauranga has been set up so that a lot of Māoridom has been set in a space where you have those that do te reo, sit in te reo spaces, those that do kapahaka, sit in kapahaka spaces. What Uncle Che has done with our rōpū is pulled in everybody, so a whole range of us that are all diverse. None of us knew what we were offering to the table, but we got a calling to come in and sit with him. And as a collective, it creates this pressure cooker of knowledge. So you recognise that, like they're getting down at MetService where you've got 160 matikite, I guess, in our rōpū we have the same sort of kaupapa of 30 people that are joining all of the different jigsaw pieces together. It's the recognition of community and collective understanding in order to shift the way in which we move forward. When you talk about legislation, there's so much legislation. We have a te tiriti that tells us how important partnership is. We have legislation that outlines how we best do that. We also have policies, you know, like pai ora that sit in all of these health and disability spaces that tell us the way in which we need to be mobilising as people. However, the practice, which we know from an Indigenous aspect, is just as important as the theory, isn't happening. And if the practice isn't following, no transformation can occur. So we have to, I guess, figure out how. So there's, I guess at the moment when we think about Matariki, and the last, I guess, for me, 3 years of complete race consciousness, last year with the national race consciousness of people, regardless of creed, race, all lifting their voices to engage with our taio, with our tuakana, with our atua, has had a really big effect across the country. Now, it doesn't look, I guess in Te Ao Māori, when I look at science and stuff like that, it doesn't look like it's a tangible occurring space, because for me it happens so intrinsically. Things move and produce and come to the forefront exactly when it needs to. And so we really sit in that. So when we say engaging with our environment and changing our behaviours, it's also understanding that innate knowing, what sits in your puku, what makes you move and shift as well, which has been that unspoken language that we have in Indigenous. And so it's re-engaging all of that as well to try to shift change. And so it doesn't look obvious, I guess, half the time in Western paradigms, because it's still being led out from a Western view. But I know in our own spaces, in our own Indigenous spaces, globally, it's happening. So we just sort of need the precipice to sort of pour in so that it just starts to pour now instead of just drip feeding.
What's going to make people pay more attention? I mean, I think to myself, what, today or last night, gas is going up nearly $30, 30 cents a litre or something like that, and that will hit people in the pocket, and perhaps they'll think more about, you know, their footprints and so forth. What are some of the observations that you guys have garnered through Tai Aorongo that are perhaps more efficacious, if you like, than the current pleas that come out?
I just been processing your question, and interesting you said again we're so economically driven because we don't have many choices. What's in, how much is in our pocket, because cost of living's rising, etc. So it doesn't give us many choices. I think probably the confluence of those two would be reverting back to our Indigenous timing system is a good start. This is where the Maramataka comes in. So we have universalised our comfortability, so to speak. The Gregorian system is a universal system. You know, that's the timing that has demand. It's what we demand on the time and the environment.
Yeah.
That's how that Gregorian calendar system works. Lean into what the learning of Rangimata Mua, Che Wilson, Ricky Solomon, Meretini's doing with their mahi and their practice. You can get some learning from them to help you process, okay, what do I do with that learning? Now, then moving into an Indigenous timing system, which is the Maramataka, which is an environmental calendar. It's the environment determining when we do things rather than the time's best for us, so I'm going to do it now. That's probably a really good shift to start learning. We can be ambidextrous. I'm learning to be ambidextrous. I've been so colonised by the Gregorian calendar system. Once I've learned about it, I'm going, oh, that's not fair. I've never figured out why do we celebrate a rabbit laying a chocolate egg? Could never figure that. Santa? Who was that big fat dude? And we have we're celebrating and all this paraphernalia of Christmas and there's snow. As a kid, I've never figured that out. But hey, look, I've brought into it because we get presents and chocolate. You know, that's gonna get a kid attached. Let's change how we're bringing up our children into a system that's relevant at place. You know, here. This is the southern hemisphere. And that's why we've got Matariki, because it's so relevant to us. And everybody can celebrate it. It's all inclusive. So that's a good start around the behavioural change. We've just started Te Tauhou, the new year. It's Kotahi Kaupeka o Te Tau. We've got so many other seasons of the year to observe how do we change into those seasons. What's in the environment that's telling us? We've heard the famous kōrero around the pipi wharaurua. When the pipi wharaurua arrives and you start hearing its call, kua tai mai a koanga, spring's arrived. And that pipi wharaurua is saying in its call how many rows of kumara can plant. And we've also done a reading at the start of Matariki, the two whetū of Matariki, Ururangi, Waipunarangi, wind, rain. Take that in combination, there's going to be a lot of moisture. But the pipi wharaurua is saying, you should only plant 2 rows of kumara, not 4. That's the number of calls it makes. So that's the decision making that we're doing. We're taking the signs from the Te Taiao, what it's telling us, making a decision that shifts our behaviour. Maybe this isn't the best time to plant lots of kumara. Let's plant some kai that can adapt to the environment that's coming. So that's what I do. I plant pumpkin that loves more moisture, more water, instead of planting deeper root crops. So there you go, get into gardening.
Meretini, just following on this whakaaro, because I think it's a fascinating thing to re-evaluate our timing system. Even with regard, we were talking before about our mahi, if we can work at different times, not everyone is an agriculturalist, not everyone fishes. What is there about the Maramataka and the energies and the teachings in that can relate to someone who wants to find a better time system, but it's not necessarily about planting, or it's just finding the right energies?
Yeah. So number one, we have a saying in Wanganui that we say, no tōku pikiamu kura noi, ko tōku pikiamu kura nōku. So what you learn in your house of learning is for you, what I learn in my house of learning is for me. And with that saying goes the concept of what is it that you value. So there's no point talking about Maramataka if you first have not established that value of self. So your first relationship becomes you and the taiao. So you need to go out and engage with it and see what happens to you. So take a measurement every single day on one concept that you value and learn to understand it over the whole entire marama, from whiro through to mutu, and just start to learn first your own ebbs and flows. You have to do that first. There's lots and lots of information out there about what's best for this, what's best for that. But my critical understanding, I guess, around it is that where there isn't the same, then that's your mana motuhake. You start to determine what yours also starts to look like. And I've always known that if you're not a fisherman and if you're not a gardener, then having a Maramataka that's based around that. But again, I'll return to what it was around our whole Indigenous knowing is that we are the taiao, and the taiao was us. Talking about a seed isn't just about the kākano that you plant in the ground. It is us, mai iruia te rangi te iruia mai. So we are kākano as well. So I always then go, okay, so if this is happening in the soil to this, then what is that? As a kākano myself, what am I doing? And how might I be able to shift? A big thing that I noticed, and I'm learning in research as I go through the Maramataka as well, is the understanding of emotion from a tūpuna perspective. There's the current model, I guess, of care around health at the moment is very medically based. Tell me whereabouts in that medical outline does it tell you how to deal with distress, how to deal with pain, and how to deal with grief. There's not a lot of spaces in our current model Western system that tells you how to do that. Yet the Maramataka and our tūpuna kōrero and our relationship with understanding the taiao has so many lessons that we have thousands and thousands of years of whakapapa and complexity and understanding of complexity that unpacks grief and unpacks the uncomfort that sits in it. So I know for lots of people, we've been so used to comfort and comfortable spaces that actually, I use this analogy around a seed, is that in order for a seed to thrive and grow, it has to completely unravel itself and split. And so that's uncomfortable as. And so we never give ourselves enough time to sit in the uncomfort. The Maramataka has so many lessons and learnings for us to be able to understand and process through all the uncomfort spaces as well. So much whakapapa in them. In the names, so for us we have three primary ones I use all the time, is hotu, mawharu and atua haihai, which are all expressions of grief and emotion. And they're the phases that we're just going through at the moment. And these are all in depth of understanding how to be okay with discomfort and how to lean into it. Yeah. So I think that's a big piece of it, is being able to recognise the discomfort that we all have to sit in sometimes. All of us want easy, quick solutions to move out of things. But actually, a kauri tree that is 400 or 500 years old didn't come out of the ground as a tree.
There's a big problem there, I think. I think one of the most uncomfortable things for us as a species is to find ourselves in a position of humility and actually to be able to be humble enough before nature to take that on board when our society inclines us to be the other way, if you like. The Far North Mayor, Moko Tepania, one of the first acts he did was to change all the council meetings to fit in with the Maramataka. Yep. What would be the advantage of that if you're talking about the emotional capacity and those energies in the Maramataka? What's the tangible benefit for the governance of the Far North by doing that?
So preparation. So for me, prevention and preparation is a key part of what we learn in our mahi, and specifically with Maramataka. So I split the quadrants down into initiate, communicate, activate, evaluate.
Right.
So having an option to evaluate is a really critical piece of reflecting on what we know and reset, and our reset all the time. So you are going, it's a little bit of a manipulation of the environment to know how people will ebb and flow throughout the process. And so trying to get tamariki, actually, this is a way where you, because Moko did it first with tamariki at 3 kura up in the far north, did a big, huge research piece on using it within the kura. So kids are really great to watch how they mobilise. And so what you'd see is that ako nui, you'd try to have teachers holding children inside when all they want to do is run. And so flipping it and looking at actually what do they need and what can we supply for them. What, we might want to sit inside and be warm, but actually what do our kids need? Let's move them outside, let's get them activated, because the energy level is really, really high. You might have seen with the tamatea phases that there's some angst that happens, there's some real uncomfortable moments, people might be finding themselves real irritable. And so you don't want to call a big massive hui that's there to discuss really important kaupapa if people are going to take all of that at offence half the time. And so you try to, we use the Maramataka specifically to be able to mobilise the best way to work as a collective. I use the kore piriki tangaro phases to have the most those conversations that we never want to have, because you never know whether or not someone's going to take it really well. But actually, kore piriki tangaro, those are all phases. That's a phase where no one's offended. So I always use it as one of those ones where you need to have that. It might be the harsh discussion with anyone actually. Yeah. So it's about that. It's understanding the way in which people will be able to take on the information, but also to help you reflect and evaluate how you make sense of all of that. And the beauty of it is that you get 12 to 13 chances for a whole solar year to be able to process all of that, as opposed to trying to start all your mahi at the beginning of the 1st of January and then processing all the way through to the 31st of December. We have 12 opportunities to continue to go through that, to process through that.
Yeah.
So.
What an amazing new way to deliver bad news and just to think about relationships.
Yeah,
it really is. But I suppose part of that is and we talk about a superpower, I suppose our superpower is to actually be linked into those truths of nature and to be totally fused, I guess, and at one with it.
Yep.
Whakaaro anō hoki e koutou? Any questions? Sir, once again.
So I was talking to a business owner yesterday, and he was approached by someone from Let's Get Moving Wellington, and they were informed that the goal is to remove car parking by up to 30% in their area. They're running on fine margins as it is. You cut down the ability of people to transit into these places, and then all of a sudden their margins are even tighter. Earlier this year, Tory Street was closed off, and that had a big impact on businesses. The thing is, with changing behaviours, if you're going to take away cars and create cycle lanes, how are you going to mitigate all of the people who have large families or dependents or elderly people? They can't all ride bikes together. You've got people dependent. So I guess from a pragmatic standpoint, number one, in terms of New Zealand, what percentage of the worldwide carbon emissions are we responsible for? How much of that is China and India going to take responsibility for? And three, we see wealthy people preaching us to be sort of prudent in our behaviour, but they're travelling to these events in Davos in private jets regularly. So going back to your original thing, Tainui, how do we take this seriously when they're telling us to do things that have huge implications on our practicalities? I hear you with getting in touch with nature, but I think we need to somewhat offset that with the comparative size chunks of what we are causing and what we're responsible for. And is carbon the number one threat, or is it pollution?
Big stuff.
Yeah, no, it's very, it's just a real hoha, what we do here is just a small smidgen compared to what the massive impacts are happening with other countries impact on the environment. They have different culture, different connections, and then that huge comparison between those of which I mentioned before. We don't have a choice in terms of economics. We're already in a back foot to start off with, compared to the minority that own the majority, and that get to make all the big decisions that impact us down the end. All I can say is, how do we create a movement in those pockets? It's a hard one to, I think that debate is, we've been smashing that around for a long time. I've been up to India on a trip, and I could see the pollution, big piles of, and because people come first rather than the environment. It is a big question, and we trying to make our difference in our world, but I think that we can at least start a movement. Hence why I said Māori are global. Like, I like to see us on up at Geneva at one point, talking about our methodology, our ancestral knowledge systems that, catch up. We've been doing this for ages. I think the technology isn't really caught up yet. I think with those extreme weather events, the technology can't pick it up because it's happening really abnormally and unpredictable. I think our observations can possibly actually forewarn prior, because we're very at place. And speak up on those forums, because I think all those other world meteorological organisations that are monitoring and seeing, they don't fix it, they're just observers like us. They can say what's happening, but we can say what the impact will be. And I think that's the difference with our knowledge system compared to some of the technology, these satellites that are going around picking up data, throwing it down to people that are analysing it, and they're not doing it quick enough because it's that those events are already happening. I think the technology actually is not catching up quick enough, but our Indigenous knowledge systems, through our intergenerational ability to pick up patterns. Hey, there's the connection to technology, AI, artificial intelligence. How artificial intelligence works is it's only as good as the information you put into it, and then it picks up the pattern to give you an answer. What information is going into it? I think if it's that's people-based information going into that. Our kōrero tuku iho, that's what technology terminology now is artificial intelligence. Kōrero tuku iho is intergenerational transmission of knowledge of us, picking up those observations, learning the patterns, and we put into it from an environmental perspective centric, rather than a people patterns. I think that might be a bit of a difference there. Hey, we can talk future technology too, from an Indigenous perspective. Now what's happening is we'll pick up patterns that we expect, and then we'll hit one that's abnormal. What's that? That's a tohu. What's it telling us? But it comes from an environmental decision, not a people one. I think there's some good research in that topic.
Does by and large, reading the environment in the way you do, because of the knowledge that you have of our Indigenous thinking, do you get any pushback?
Oh, absolutely, because people are threatened. Because oh geez, that's a big kōrero. Do we want to go there, Tainui?
Well, the other thing too, I think as you talk, and the points that have been raised are really valid, in terms of the day-to-days. And I wonder to what extent is the challenge mostly in the messaging?
Good question.
How do we get buy-in, really?
Yeah.
How do we fashion this movement? You know, pain at the pump or, you know, bad weather in some ways hasn't been enough.
Yeah, there's a huge need for value of both our systems of knowledge to sit equally in this space. At the moment, it's not happening. We talk about partnership, it's not happening on the level in terms of our worldview. So if we're talking about people-centric AI versus envirocentric AI, that's an Indigenous worldview sits there. Our Western worldview sits here, but right now ours is the least accepted. And so we need to continue to be in forums like this, to do research like we're doing, to set the bar so that those that are coming up behind us are already got the scaffolding to create some real critical change, you know.
Do you think the quick, well, I don't know about quick, but the uptake on Matariki is positive in a political sense to get us to a point where these decisions can be made, where we can actually conceive of being envirocentric rather than human-centric?
Yes. Do I think it's...
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see what's going to happen with us as Matariki is embedded into Aotearoa like Christmas is. Right, I'm really kind of excited what we're going to see in the future, because that is again, it's through Matariki is all the ceremonies attached to Matariki, the themes, even with Puanga, the themes attached to it are all around bringing us together again, acknowledging the past. I think from a Western-centric point of view, you don't often see that worldview recognise the past, and you don't often see the reset, and so they carry that through. I think we've got this beautiful ability to reset. Yeah.
Change the timing system in a way.
Yeah, that reset. That's why I'm saying have a little think about how the environmental calendar or the Indigenous timing system works. Have a look at the Gregorian calendar and then say, does that actually connect with me? And then have a look at what we're learning around the Indigenous calendar system. That means you will take cues from the environment when we change seasons. It means that 1st of September isn't really when we start spring, right? You've probably already seen the daffodils flower way before that. I think there's lots. I'm really excited what will happen as it gets embedded. Because I think we're going, like, remember I mentioned before that Mātauranga Māori forces us to have a relationship with the environment. I would love everybody through Matariki to start having practicing it, embedding it, understanding it, and you've been forced to have this relationship. Love to see our kids move away and be more excited about Matariki as the start of the new year, where we're getting them to recognise the year that they've been through, be present to what's happening now, and then make those future wishes. What next? So Christmas isn't doing that. It's like, let's get some more presents. Brings us together, as well. So I'm looking, and then we can share that with all New Zealanders. It is part of all of us. Yeah. It's so inclusive, but it's come through a Māori's cultural pathway. Yeah.
Can I just ask the audience, just firstly, hands up those who think of Matariki as more than just a day off, but those who feel that there's something meaningful happening here. Ka pai. Hands up those who feel, therefore, that you're part of a movement. Ka pai. Cool. Pātai.
Really inspired and really uncomfortable with that inspiration, as you mentioned.
we can start to shift the language we use, because maybe what is pragmatic is to shift the focus on business outcomes and commercial outcomes. It's hard. I don't know how to do that. So really keen to hear how you do that.
What we have to find it though is the size is a problem, and in particular New Zealand's contribution to that bigger problem. And like I said, if India and China aren't going to do anything about this crisis, then what is the point of changing our behaviours for less than 1% of that big problem?
Is it useful to define the scope? Because who's going to run? There is no
Until we know it, why are we making such drastic changes? I'm seeing with the cycleways being built, it's causing massive roadworks that have been ongoing for years, causing massive disruptions, and now we're being told that, hey, we may need to have people with unique individual digital identities so that people can be assigned carbon credits so that they can be given allocations to travel in and out of different zones. And we're talking about not too far distant future, just to get things done. So if I have 150 carbon credits available to me every week, and it costs me 30 or 40 carbon credits to get to Wellington City from my home in Hutt Valley, then I know I'm limited with how far I can go. So I'm thinking ahead here, but all I'm saying is until we know the size of the problem and our contribution to that overall size, why are we making these dramatic changes that are costing so much money in infrastructure, and we're printing money like it's nothing? And I'm just saying, are we trying to save the environment? That's one thing, but at what cost? People's lives are at stake. So it's a biggie. And politically, you did mention that you're tied to the World Meteorological sort of body. That does have concerns for me, because it's telling me that decision making is happening outside of that, sort of outside of your zone, at least a large scale of influences. So.
Yeah, in response to that one, that is the technology used to set standards around how we forecast weather. So how we forecast the solutions to. We're weather observers. We don't MetService at that level don't decide what's going to happen from that. They provide information, and then everything else has been decided on that. So kia ora, Presh. Yes, we have known each other for ages, and thank you. I appreciate your observation. What got me to where I am now, and that transformation in my behaviour is leaning, like I mentioned before, leaning into the ones that are so giving to help fill the gaps, and the first off is identity, me being comfortable who I am, and that took a journey because it didn't start well. You know, who am I? Where did I come from? You know, that family situation, and I think that a lot of us could be in that similar, especially Māori, around colonisation and the impacts of. So the reconnection helps with yourself. Beautiful, we have a tool there called the Maramataka that can help us, and leaning into those beautiful tohunga. Like, we're lucky with the Taiorongo program. We have Che Wilson that's helping lead, who's holding all the knowledge, but him by himself can't transmit that information without a good team around him. And we all have different abilities, and so because we have all these different abilities, we're learning faster. Because, like he says, he doesn't want all the reo Māori speakers hanging out over there. He doesn't want all the Marakai ones there. He doesn't want all the hunter gatherers. The beauty is he's brought us all together, as you call us, in a centric group. And so I've grown because I've had beautiful people I've been able to connect with, like Meretini, Che, all the other people in there. And just called resilience and determination has also been the other part of the growth. So don't give up, just even though you think your little bit not making a difference, it actually is, because the sum of all parts, right, makes the movement. So your little bit, yes, or another little bit, yeah, we'll all start making those changes. Yeah, it's incremental, but all I'm going to say is we're not going anywhere. Hey, and what did COVID do? It stopped the world. The environment stopped us. And it made it, because it wanted to breathe again. Look what happened during COVID when we were all locked up. You know, you've been naughty, I'm going to lock you up in your house. And in our houses, the environment started to breathe again because we were choking it. And it was looking for that reset. Put us away in our naughty little boxes, naughty little corner. Hey, and during that same time, there are some of us that were actually be able to reconnect with our whānau because we had to be present. And then it made us think, whoa, food sovereignty, food resilience, how we're going to feed ourselves. Oh my gosh, the controllers with so many different big companies. How will I ensure that my whānau can be and have decisions in the future? So it starts with yourself, making some behavioural, and that it's a big task to ask for, but it's totally doable in your little bit. And what are you passing on next to our? So I'm enjoying the time that I'm managing to expose my kids to the learning that I'm learning. So that's really important.
Ka pai, kia ora.
Tainui, can I just pass a comment?
Yes, Darcy.
I'm number 11 in a family of 12. My mum and dad would be close to 120 if they were still alive today. My grandfather would be 160. I was raised by the old people, and what they call Maramataka was something that had a lot to do with the moon, not the stars. And it was the phases of the moon where the moon was closest to the earth. Now, because of that, the tides were massive. Okay, so as children, we had to go out and gather the seafood. We put them in little baskets, we take them back and we deliver them to all the elders who we were related to. So we learned whakapapa. The children who saw us delivering those learned whakapapa, and then we didn't have electricity at home. So we existed on the stories that were told. So the elders would come together and tell stories of who we are, who we're related to, the stories of Parihaka, the stories of the Kawi Mauna people, and the stories of the migration of canoes and the Maori. We learned those from the elders, okay, and we retained that. Many, many years ago, I joined the contemporary Maori art movement in the mid-60s, okay, and we sat there, and I remember Johnny Ford, who taught at Massey University, said, our greatest bloody fear is one day the academics will take over and they'll colonise us, okay? And that's what's happened, is academically we've sort of put these in little academic colonial phases and we've gone away from the environment.
Yep.
I told the government people there's three waters description, the definition of three waters is very, very misleading because all they're talking about is the pollution of the rivers, the sea and the lakes, okay? Talk about it like that. When we were kids, around this time of the full moon, the pihara would migrate up the river, so we would have all of our eel traps set, okay? The conger eels would also come up the streams, so we'd have that all set, and then the birds would fly down from Siberia, and they would go out and they'd hunt those. The end result is the timing was such so that if we had too much seafood, paua and mussels and eels, we would put them out to dry. Okay, they would dry in the sun. When we were hungry and the elders were away, we would just go and help ourselves to the dried food. Okay, at the same time, the puha, the watercress, the poraporo, they were flourishing, okay? And it was the same time that the farmers were downloading their food, okay, their pigs. So we would have pork bones and puha and watercress and all that sort of stuff. The potatoes would be ripening, okay? That's what that time was. It had nothing to do with the stars. Now we've gotten all confused because we're looking up and saying, well, what the hell's this guy doing stars? I was forced to, as you know, to spend time with Mo, the navigator, okay, of the Ukulele, and he taught us about the stars and the tidal differences and the waves and the flight of birds, okay? So we heard that from people who were out there living in the environment. There's no reason for us to have any impact on commercial operations that are happening, okay? Those should just continue on, but we need to clean up the rivers and the seas and all the pollution that's going on in the environment. I drove up here, there used to be a lot of pine trees here. They're all lying at the moment in the Wellington Walk, they have been cut down and left there. So we're dealing with a lot of pragmatic things that we need to look at. Even co-governance is splitting us. Okay, co-governance wasn't to turn around, I've had words from him to talk about it. It wasn't to turn around and say we're going to have equal rule. Okay, we want to be consulted. We want to be talked to about what the hell is happening in the country, okay? And that's what we're driving at the moment, is talk to us. Let us know what you're doing, and we want to tell you the impact that has on our people, and that's happening right through. So that's what a lot of that stuff, that's why I came here to listen to the talk about it.
Ka pai, kia ora Darcy.
Because I'm working at a base level on all this stuff. Yeah, so
Kia ora kaurua tahi ko James.
we'll get there, okay? We'll get there, but only if we stand together, both the Maori and Pākehā stand together.
But one of the things about that, Darcy, is you're talking about a time when there was connection. And there was connection and there was a chance to tell the stories. And as a closing whakaaro, Meretini, what do you feel we need to do, if you like, to take on that personal commitment that Francene talked about? Because I think to me it's personal commitment in your private space as well. It's not just personal commitment where you can be seen. So do you want to just finish our session with your whakaaro along those lines, how we can contribute? I mean, it can get a bit, what's the word? Oh, not depressing, that's too strong a word, because, 30 years ago, those who loved the language could never have dreamed that we're at where we are now. Those who thought about Matariki 10 years ago and, couldn't dream where we're at now. So, o whakaora hei whakakapi te kaupapa nei hoa.
So my turn, I talked about before about how we found where we are now, where we are today. Mortality is what taught me about where I am today, and being okay with mortality, and then leaning into my role innately as a wāhine that can create children and create whakapapa. So I'm doing my best in my world personally to ensure those that come behind me have, leaving them as many clues and codes as I can in the lifetime that I have, the same way that our tupuna have done it, and looking at the mortality of that. Our tupuna exists constantly in our conversations daily. And so, I just hope that every contribution I make is, it's not, I don't think it's going to be world changing, but if it changes one mind at a time, then that's okay. But as a mum though, as a mother of 3 kohine, I just want to make sure that everything that I leave behind is something for them to be able to pick up and continue to hold that in their heart. So to continue to have them, living in a world, like I never would have expected the world that we're in now. My mum would be amazed to see the world in which she knew is actually at the fruition at the moment. And so I know that it takes time, but it happens. And our tupuna are talking to us to help us to remember that it's all still happening again. So I'm just engaging into that space constantly, and that's how I navigate through the world. I also do throw out a whole heap of numbers and stats and research pieces to those that also need to hear that type of information, just to remind them of, what the other contribution looks like as well. So, but personally, for me, it's understanding mortality, understanding my role to be able to create life and having had the benefit of being able to do that. And so what do I want to leave behind to ensure that everyone that's in behind me is got, a plethora of better tools,
That's a beautiful superpower, Meretini, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe, Francene, tēnā koutua tahi me ngā hakaaro rangatira, I whakatauri ai, hei unu mā mātou. Nā rere kei te miha tura, tēnā koutua. Hoi no ki ara koutou, kua tai mai, te whakaaro, whai whakaaru I ene kaupapa nui, is a lovely and simple but profound thing to think of our mortality and what we can contribute in an odd kind of way to make us immortal. Nō rere te whānau mā tēnā koutou. Kia ora mai tātou katoa. Thank you.